And we're going. Welcome to the virtual chapter. It is the first time on our brand new site, and I'm glad those of you who are here were able to find this new number. It's a new logon number. Put it in your calendar so that you'll know, because from now on, every Tuesday is going to be this logon number for the virtual chapter. I'm Karen Hand. Normally, my wonderful co-host Michael Watson leads this meeting, and Michael is so busy because he's so good at what he does that he actually was double booked on tonight. And that's the wonderful thing about having a co-host, right? So that you can on occasion take a night off. Michael has left us on our own, which means I'm going to need more help from you guys, obviously. But we've got such a great guest, Andrew Duff McDuffie. We're going to talk about submodalities and a whole bunch of other stuff coming up. So couple of announcements and we'll get right to Duff because I'm really, really excited about hearing this. First of all, there will be a replay. You guys are here, but if you want to go back and see anything, Duff has promised to take us through some techniques and do some things with us tonight. So you might want to go back and rewatch that actually at some point. So there will be a replay. It'll be on Facebook tomorrow afternoon. It'll be on the IACT IMDHA site. You'll be able to get it there. You do get CEUs for joining us tonight, so just sign on to IACT and IMDHA for sure. ICBCH gives you CEUs for this, IHF, and friendly organizations will give you CEUs for joining us here tonight too. And if you're on the replay counts, by the way. Speaking of ICBCH, it's coming up next month, February 17th through 18th. I'll be teaching there the first day with Kelly T. Woods. We're going to do a whole day on doing workshops, creating workshops to build business, to instruct, creating workshops to pass along the message. It's going to be a great day. And I'll bet Duff is teaching there too.
I am, yes. I'm teaching, putting the programming back in neuro-linguistic programming.
And we're going to be talking about NLP and submodalities just a moment. That was just a little tease of what's coming up. I also want to tell you about the IACT IMDHA Hypno Expo. Of course, you can register now. It's all ready to go. You got to get your hotel rooms booked because it's going to fill up. That will be April 24th through 26th in Orlando this year. What a great time that's going to be. And real quick in October, it's the Mid-America Hypnosis Conference. Tomorrow, January 15th, is the deadline for speaker submissions. So if you want to speak at the Mid-America Conference, get those submissions in before midnight, January 15th. If you're watching this on the replay, sorry, it's always the third weekend in October. You can join us. Join us for the conference. You can always speak next year. So that's enough from me. I have to, Michael does all of these controls and really does it so well that what I have forgotten to do is mute everybody. Let me see if I can do that. Mute all. I'm going to mute everybody. And then, of course, if you want to talk, you can talk in the chat room or you can raise your hand. You can let me know with a message. That way, it's just going to hold down some of the noise of the event. But you can always, we'll open it up for questions later on. If you've got a question, just put it in the chat room and I'll watch that. And then Duff can just handle talking to you guys and doing his thing. So enough from me. Our guest is Andrew Duff McDuffie. He's worked as a coach and a trainer since 2003, using NLP and hypnosis to create change at the unconscious level. He's taught NLP practitioner trainings, neo-Ericksonian hypnosis, core transformation, and much more. He's presented at top hypnosis conferences such as HypnoThoughts Live, ICBCH, HPTI, and ACHE. Duff specializes in helping people transform anxiety and stress into calm and courage. I've heard about this guy a lot. And I've really wanted to see you, Duff, a lot.
There I am.
The one time that I really thought I was going to be able to, we were opposite each other at the ICBCH. And so
yeah, it happens. There's just so much going on at those conferences. It's hard to line everything up.
HypnoThoughts came along, and I was able to watch you talk about using that magnificent voice that you have. And if there's time, maybe we can peek in on that a little bit. But right now, you have a whole idea of what you want to talk about with your expertise.
Sure.
So
Michael Watson and I talked a little bit about talking about submodalities before we got double booked and couldn't be here tonight. So submodalities, I think, are a topic that many hypnotists kind of shy away from. They seem complicated, seems technical. a little too, maybe scary to use. So we're going to go over just some basic ideas around submodalities. Of course, you can chime in, Karen. If anyone has thoughts or questions, you can chime in. It's not a presentation so much as just a gathering of friends here talking about some interesting topics together. So we can be a little informal about it. But I'd like to just give a few ways that I think about submodalities that I think really help to understand what is this stuff and how do we use it. So the first basic idea that I'd like to talk about is just something that most people assume to be true as they go throughout the world, including hypnotists and NLP practitioners most of the time, which is this: external things cause my feelings and behaviors. Most of the time we're operating out of that mode, right? So something happens and we think, oh, this made me feel bad, or I have to do this. And so we get these sort of, we say in NLP, modal operators of necessity: have to, must, and also this cause effect. A causes B. The external world causes my internal world. And we operate like that most of the time, even if we're into NLP and hypnosis. We might catch ourselves faster than other people. But most of the time, that's just our basic way of relating to the world. We might call that the...
Are you sure that when somebody cuts me off in traffic and I flip them off, I wasn't caused to do that?
Sure, it sure seems like that, right? And it's a model of the world that we operate from. As we talk about in NLP, there's these models that we create for understanding reality. The map, we map a territory, but of course the map isn't exactly the same as the territory. It deletes, distorts, and generalizes that territory in order to be useful, though. So this is actually a useful way of going through the world some of the time. We might call it the direct cause model, that A causes B. The external world causes me to feel what I feel, causes me to behave how I behave. This has some advantages. It really describes how we often feel, right? Feelings are automatic. They just happen. We don't have to practice them. They're not conscious. So that actually does kind of explain our experience. It captures that feeling of automaticity, as they say in the literature, of just being automatic. It's also simple and easy to understand. Everybody gets it. And so you can really relate with other people. And they say, yeah, I was driving in traffic and it pissed me off. We can all say, yeah, I get that. That makes sense to me too. And so, there's some advantages. But there are some disadvantages to this model, which we already know as hypnotists and NLP practitioners. The main one being it doesn't have any opportunity for change there, right? We're at the mercy of our environment. I'm not responsible. Oh, that's nice. I'm not having to be responsible. But I'm also the victim of my environment and other people and everything that happens to me. So there is a different model, luckily, that exists out there of how we can interpret the world and our experiences. And it's not new. We didn't make this up in the last 20 or 30 years. It's actually been around for many thousands of years, at least as far back as the Stoics. And Jerry will like that I'm referring to the Stoics today.
Yes.
Because I'm going to quote Epictetus, who's a Stoic from right around 30 AD or so. And there's a very famous book called the Handbook of Epictetus, which is still around today and very readable, and it describes Stoic philosophy. And one of the passages in this handbook goes like this. It says, "It isn't the things themselves that disturb people, but the judgments that they form about them." It isn't the things themselves that disturb people, but the judgments they form about them. And in fact, he goes off and on and says, death, for instance, is nothing terrible, or else it would have seemed so to Socrates too. Socrates famously was killed for corrupting the youth of Athens by asking them a lot of annoying questions and making them think a lot. But he faced death very bravely. He embraced it. He didn't run away. And so death obviously wasn't terrifying to him. So death isn't terrifying in itself. It's just how we interpret it. So this model has found its way into various methods of change, therapies, and so on. One of the big ones being cognitive behavioral therapy, which was directly influenced by Stoicism through Albert Ellis, who created rational emotive behavioral therapy and said very explicitly, this is about making Stoicism into a therapy for the modern world. And then through that became cognitive behavioral therapy later. And it's called the cognitive model. So the cognitive model is not external events cause me to feel and behave the way I do. But sometimes it's called the ABC model in cognitive behavioral therapy. And some people have heard of this. So the ABC model is there's something in between the cause and the effect. The A, we could say, is the activating event, the external thing. The B is the belief that it's sort of filtered through. And the C is the consequence, or the effect that it has in terms of how we feel, how we behave. And so the ABC model in cognitive behavioral therapy, also called the cognitive model, gives us an alternative to that direct cause model where we're just the victim of everything that's happening to us. And instead, we have this choice point, which is our thoughts or beliefs about how we're interpreting things. So it's not the things themselves that disturb us, but the judgments we form about them. So, but B can also could be BS, because it's kind of it's a belief system, but it's also nonsense. It's not really true. Our beliefs about reality are just our interpretations. They're not really true. There are maps or models of the world, and they can be very distorted, or they can be very helpful, depending on how we're thinking about it.
And either way, we act and behave as if they are real.
Exactly, right. Yeah, when we believe something is real, of course, we act as if that's the case. And that can be very useful, or it can be very problematic, depending on the context and our maps and how accurate they are or useful they are. So that just sort of begs the question, though. So if we have this ABC model, so the activating external event comes in, filtered through our beliefs. B, what is believing? What is thinking? And what's our model of thinking? So cognitive behavioral therapy in particular sees thinking a very specific way that may or may not be useful. So cognitive behavioral therapy sees thinking as self-talk. And that's it. It's just self-talk. It's just what you say to yourself. It's all verbal. It's not other people's internal voices. It's not music that's auditory, but there's no music in cognitive behavioral therapy. It's just self-talk. And so that can be very useful. Cognitive behavioral therapy does work. We have studies proving it works. And so, but seeing it as that model, what CBT does is then try to change your internal self-talk. So for instance, if you see a friend walking down the street and they don't acknowledge you, you see them, they walk right by. What's going on? Well, one possible interpretation is they're deliberately ignoring me. That jerk. Yeah. Can't believe him. Right? Yeah. Karen just ignored me. And I saw her at that conference. She didn't say anything. Of course, there are other possible interpretations. Another possible interpretation is, oh, she was really busy and running off to the next conference and just didn't see me. So the first interpretation, of course, brings up feelings of anger, hurt, being wronged. And the second is just sort of neutral feelings, no big deal. And this is just based on how we interpret it and what we said to ourselves in our self-talk. They're ignoring me, or they're just busy, right? And so cognitive behavioral therapy model, the cognitive model, where thinking is just self-talk, says you can change your thinking and therefore change your feelings and behaviors by deliberately challenging cognitive distortions. So in the first interpretation, I'm saying, they're ignoring me. Well, that's mind reading. I don't know what's actually going on in that person's mind, right? And we say that similar thing in the meta model. The meta model distinctions in NLP are really, questioning, is that really true? What is that? All or nothing thinking, that sort of thing. Questioning that, and that can lead to much more useful thoughts. So we can question those distorted thoughts or those thoughts that aren't useful and get more useful thoughts. There's also another model that we can use, which is like the mindfulness model. So in the mindfulness model, external things come in and then automatic thoughts and feelings arise, but we don't have to be attached to those feelings. We can sort of just notice them as like a neutral observer or witness. And in this model, meditators usually notice that thoughts are not just self-talk. There's a lot of self-talk. There's a lot of monkey mind, blah, 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 but it's not just that. There's often visual thoughts too. And of course, as hypnotists, we know there's visual thoughts because we use a lot of visual processes where we imagine things. So meditators or the mindfulness model can notice that there are not just self-talk, but other kinds of thinking going on. But typically in a mindfulness model, at least my experience doing Goenka Vipassana courses, which were very useful for me, it's considered that thoughts and feelings are automatic and you can't really change them. There's nothing you can do about them. So you just kind of notice them and be okay with them. And that hugely helps. Don't get me wrong. That is a great progress. Much better than resisting everything that constantly arises and trying to get rid of it. The only interesting thing with that, though, is that the cognitive behavioral model, the cognitive model, actually disagrees with the mindfulness model. And a lot of people don't consider this when they, as hypnotists, we might teach both. For instance, to our clients, we might teach mindfulness at times, which can be useful, or the cognitive approach at times, which can be useful. But interestingly, they disagree, because in the cognitive model, you shouldn't just accept feelings as they are, because feelings are based on interpretations, which could be false or misleading in some way. So for instance, if I assume that Karen snubbed me at the conference because she walked on by and didn't even say anything to me, and that assumes that she doesn't like me or something, and that's false, I could feel angry based on a false opinion or false belief, false interpretation. So if I just feel my feelings, well, those feelings are incorrect in a way. Not the feeling is incorrect, but the thought behind the feeling is incorrect. Mm-hmm. Going back to the Stoics, Epictetus had this saying, some things are within our power while others are not. This shows up in the serenity prayer that many of us know, accepting the things that are within our power and, changing the things that aren't, which goes directly back to Stoicism. So the question is, what's in our power? And our thoughts are in our power. And as it turns out, if you see them as in your power, you can actually start to change them, which is interesting. If you have a model where thoughts are outside of your power, then you won't even try, but they can actually be changed. So the question is how specifically, because thinking is often automatic. We think in the same ways over and over and over again. If we just sit there and do nothing, our thoughts come up and generate feelings. So how do we actually change those in the way that's automatic? That's the programming in neurolinguistic programming, which I'll be talking about at the conference coming up in February. But briefly, we can program ourselves to respond automatically based on various cues. This all goes back in some ways to Pavlov and his dogs, which I'm sure everyone has heard of many times. Pavlov was actually studying digestion. And so he was trying to figure out how you can get dogs to salivate and get the digestive system kicked off in a reliable way so he could study it. And so he did something very, very simple to get dogs to salivate on command. She just, rang a little bell, gave the dogs some food, and they ate it. And then he just repeated that process several times a day over the next few days. And at some point, he rang the bell, and the dogs were like, okay, it's dinner time. They just learned to link that up just from mere association. So we can do similar things. We do these things as hypnotists all the time. One of the very basic things that many stage hypnotists do, or many people here, I'm sure, do with their clients, is just teach people how to relax on command in response, or go into trance on command. The first time might take a little longer because you do a longer induction, perhaps, but then you can create a post-hypnotic suggestion, which is just an anchor or an association or a cue, like the bell. It can be it could literally be a bell if you wanted it to be. It doesn't even matter. And in fact, Pavlov didn't only use bells. He used metronomes. He used visual cues. He used electric shocks, which is pretty awful as a dog lover. Pretty. The history of psychology is very, very dark at times. But the point is that you can associate just about anything as the cue to fire off the response.
Right.
And so we can get ourselves to do other things automatically, like think automatically or go into various states automatically, just by linking things up enough times. And that will create those new neural connections, as we know, Hebb's law, neurons that fire together, wire together, etc. So it's very simple, but interestingly, outside of our little weird world of hypnosis and neurolinguistic programming, most therapists, coaches, and certainly people who are not therapists and coaches, often don't even believe it's possible to make things automatic in your nervous system or in your experience. At least when I talk with people, I talk with my clients and they say, do I need to practice this? And I say, no, you don't need to practice this. It's done. At least usually. Sometimes you have to practice it, but often it's just done. And they don't even realize that it's done because people aren't used to doing that, which is interesting. But
you're told you got to try. That's not worth getting unless you try for it, unless you work for it.
You got to try, you got to practice, you got to learn how to do it. I was just thinking about this the other day because I took a lot of psychology classes in college. I wasn't a psychology major in the end. I was a philosophy major, but I remember learning about Pavlov in Psych 101. And interestingly, we never did any classical conditioning. Like Pavlov came up with this whole thing to associate things together and make it automatic. And we never did it once. Like imagine a math class where you never do any math. You just read about math and the people who used to do math back in the day. And, but we don't do math here. It's, it's not what we do. It's hilarious when you think about it that way. But anyway.
It's the only way you can really get good at something probably, or to automate it, is to do it over and over and over, right?
Exactly. Right.
Do it. Do it.
Just do it. So we can make new automatic thoughts by just doing it over and over, but linking them up as well. But getting back to NLP. So one thing that's different about NLP from, say, cognitive behavioral therapy or mindfulness model is that we have this different model of thinking. If you ask people who are not hypnotists or NLP practitioners what thinking is, they usually will say something like self-talk. Occasionally, someone will include the visual, and virtually never will people include all five senses, which is strange because it's very easy to show people that all five senses are involved with the good old lemon test.
Yeah.
Right? So we all have done this millions of times, but if you imagine going into your kitchen, you know what your kitchen looks like, and going up to your refrigerator, and what color is your refrigerator? And you reach out and you grab the handle and you can feel the texture of the handle. And as you open the refrigerator, you can hear that sound it makes when the seal breaks. And you can look in there and there's a bright yellow lemon. And you're all hypnotists, so you're already salivating. But you can pick up the lemon and you can smell it. Smell that lemon smell. And place it on a cutting board and grab a nice sharp knife. Slice into that lemon, the juice flies everywhere, and you can pick it up, just take a big bite out of that lemon. And,
yeah.
Of course, we're all salivating at this point because we've done this in time.
Wait a minute, Duff, I just want to interrupt you for 1 second. I'm sorry about this, but I just learned this a couple of years ago in the lemon example. I have.
Yes, give us a lemon tip.
Here's a lemon tip. Beware about calling it yellow. I now have clients all over the world, and there are parts of the world where lemons are green.
What?
In Mexico and South America, lemons and limes are the same thing.
It works. Limes are luckily just as sour, so it'll work.
It does work, but I'm just saying, I now changed that to notice the color.
Notice the color, vague Ericksonian language. Yes,
that's right. And then they get to make their darn lemon any color they want. So
perfect.
My tip. Okay.
All right. Pro tip. Thanks, Karen. Appreciate that. The point being, of course, that you can use all five senses in the lemon test. And when you do so, it makes it more real, makes it more likely that they'll get the automatic salivation going and so on. So we already know instantly that we can use at least five senses in our imagination, in our thinking. Sometimes we think imagination is different than thinking somehow because thinking is more abstract. But thinking can be abstract, but also can be very concrete, very sensory-based. And that's the kind of thinking we often do in NLP and hypnosis because it creates those emotional responses or even bodily responses in the salivary glands. So already we have a more enriched map of reality when we have a visual, auditory, kinesthetic, olfactory, gustatory, VACOG for short, way of thinking about thinking. Which is great because it helps us to do more things. It's not as simple, it takes longer to explain, but it helps us to do more things with change. But we can go much further, and we do in NLP. So one of the big things that is, oh yeah, okay. So I'm lost in my notes. Hold on a second.
Take your time. Take your time.
Okay. Okay, yeah. So there's these three components of the NLP model. We have thinking, which is sometimes called internal representations. We have actions, which is called external behavior. And we have feelings, which is called internal state. And all these things are constantly interacting with each other. But one of the main aspects is that cognitive model, where our internal representations, or how we're thinking about something, creates our feelings or creates our behaviors. For instance, if we don't believe it's possible for us to do something, we're not going to do it. And if we interpret something in a certain way, we're going to feel bad versus feeling some other way. But really, all these things are interacting all the time. It's not as simple as just like a one-way street. Obviously, for instance, if you change your state, you start thinking differently. We all have had that experience. Like, we're thinking about something from a very stressed state and feeling and not really coming up with any good ideas. But our state changes because we take a nap, or we, get something to eat, or something happens that changes our state, and then we think better. But in terms of submodalities, we're often operating from this sort of cognitive model of how we're thinking about it creates our feelings or behaviors. So, oh yeah, that's what I was going to say. So the cognitive behavioral model, because it just uses self-talk, it actually can't even account for all auditory representations affecting our state. It requires sort of different words or entirely different way of interpreting something in order to feel differently within the cognitive behavioral model. Mm-hmm. But actually, it can be very simple. I'll give you an example of what doesn't work or can't really be explained. So let's say you hear in your own mind, you can't do that. Okay, so that could give you some sort of feeling. But what if you hear it in a different way? Mm-hmm. You can't do that? That might feel differently. Or what if you hear it, you can't do that?
Yes.
Or a different kind of voice tone, you can't do that. Each one of these things has a different meaning, even though it's the exact same words. It's in some ways, it's the same thought, but it's how you're thinking that thought that affects how it affects you, how you feel, what the meaning of that sentence is. And this is, of course, where we come back to in NLP and hypnosis again, the idea that nonverbal communication is a huge part of the meaning of our communication. And in this case, voice tone, tonality, the emphasis of which word, whether it's a question mark, because we have rising in tonality, and so on, affects the meaning of the phrase itself. And that is what a submodality is. A submodality, so a modality in NLP is just one of the five senses, or perhaps more than five senses. But we usually abbreviate to visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. So one of the five senses, but turned inwards, we have internal representations. And then a submodality is just an aspect of that sense door, that modality, that changes the meaning when we change it. So in the auditory, you have things like voice tone, tempo, pitch, volume, location, and so on. In the visual, you have so many options. You have distance. So how far away is it? How close? You have perceptual position. Are you looking out of your own eyes? Self-position, associated. Are you seeing yourself over there like a fly on the wall or on a TV screen, dissociated or observer position? Are you walking a mile in someone else's shoes? Other position. That radically changes how we feel about things. Size, how big or small is the image? Where is it located? Is there more than one? There's so many different distinctions in the visual that change how we feel. And then there's also distinction in kinesthetic, but there's a distinction we need to make about those distinctions first. When people think about feelings or kinesthetic sensations, there's two big categories. One is like touch, pressure, temperature, movement, buzzing, tingling, that sort of thing. And the other is actually the kinesthetic component of an emotion, which is sometimes in NLP called visceral kinesthetics. So if you feel angry, where do you feel angry in your body? It's kind of like a tension in my chest. Okay, well that's not imagining someone tensing your chest so much. It's just like the kinesthetic portion of the emotion. So sometimes it's important to make the distinction there. But yeah, in general, visual and auditory is what we're most aware of when we're thinking. And then the kinesthetic, we're most aware of the emotional component of that, or the visceral kinesthetic. So yeah, so when we're talking about submodalities, the same content or the same thought can have different meaning or different emotional qualities based on how we're thinking about it. And so let's do some examples right now and experience, because this is kind of a fun thing to explore.
Yay.
And I've talked too much already.
No, not at all. You play to explore something. Play with it.
Yes, exploring is fun. So if everybody wants to make themselves comfortable for a moment so they can explore most comfortably, and then once you're comfortable, if you just close your eyes and with your eyes closed, resting comfortably, you have probably at some point in your life seen a roller coaster from the outside, way over there. And if you imagine a roller coaster way over there, you can sort of see the car going up. And I don't know if it's a twisty roller coaster or if it's the kind that just goes up and down. But you can see that cart going over there and maybe like hear some faint "ee-ah" kind of screams from those people over there. And that's kind of an interesting thing to see and watch for a little while. But now imagine you get in line for the roller coaster. And today there's no line, so you can just go right up to the start. And you can get in that roller coaster car and you can pull down the safety bar or latch in that seatbelt real tight. And then feel the cart as it jolts and starts moving along the track and starts going up. And as you get towards the top, you start going down. And you can enjoy that experience and compare the two. Which one was the most exciting? Obvious, right? That's just a very simple distinction of perceptual position from self or observer position first and self position. Another variation on that is if you imagine you're driving along and in your rear view mirror, you see some spinning lights and you see a police car behind you, and that's kind of a certain kind of experience. But if you put that aside and imagine instead you're driving along and there's a police car in front of you and the lights start spinning, that's not quite the same experience, is it? And that's just location, where that's located in reference to you.
Those were fun, especially the roller coaster ride. I happen to love roller coasters. So
oh, good. Some people have anxiety now.
Yeah, well.
A little. So with voice tempo, there's a fun one you can do for anxiety if you happen to have some anxiety from the roller coaster. Or just in general. So you can take a phrase like, you take a phrase that you'd normally say to yourself, but since we're doing it as a group, you can either take your own phrase or you can borrow a phrase from me, which a lot of people use, including myself. I don't have enough time. I don't have enough time. And say it in your mind in that kind of tone of voice and that speed first. I don't have enough time. And notice how that makes you feel. And then try it like this. I don't have enough time. And try hearing it in your mind that way. And you might notice that's a little different. And in fact, we can slow it down even more. I don't have enough time. And you can hear it in your mind like that. And you might notice a difference. Anybody notice a difference?
Yes. Would you like anyone to share? Because I can open their mics if you'd like people to share.
If anyone wants to share about any of that or ask any questions or anything, sure.
Would this be a good time, Duff, to just take to open the mics for that?
Let's open the mics just for a moment.
Okay, I don't want to
thoughts,
get
questions,
what you're doing
experiences.
at all, but
let's get some interaction.
Unmute all. So by the way, if you have some noise going on with yours, please mute yourself just to help everybody else. But you're unmuted, so if you want to scream out something or say something, by all means, please do now. Don't everybody talk at once. Maria, you're on the screen, so you might as well say something.
Well, I didn't even realize I was on the screen.
You laughed.
Anybody notice any differences there?
That's the witch's cackle.
I noticed differences. I noticed that when you first said I don't have enough time, and I thought that, boy, I could really relate to that. And the first time you said, I don't have, I don't have enough time for you to say it this slowly. The second time you did it.
But I found that great.
I calmed way down. It really was different. And
yeah.
Yes, what a wonderful way to change that.
Yeah, very simple thing you can do with any. Generally, when we're anxious, we talk faster to ourselves, but not always. But
Ellen Birdie is raised. Is it Ellen or Evelyn?
Eileen.
Eileen, I'm sorry.
Think of me at a 45-degree angle. You'll remember that. The thing that I noticed was when it was the fast, I don't have enough time for this. It was almost paralyzing. It was near panic. But when it was, I don't have enough time for this, it put me into a prioritizing zone. What am I doing? How do I order the tasks that I have on hand? Who is asking me? And do they have a priority or do they not have a priority?
Totally. Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's great. That's a interesting thing. Why does that work? But it does. It kicks us into a more.
It was great.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was fantastic. Because I use that phrase all the time. I always say, I don't have enough time. I don't have enough time. And when you did that, I was like, oh my God, how ridiculous is that? I don't have enough time.
Right.
And I'm going to use that from now on.
Right. Yeah. The key thing to realize is when we say, I don't have enough time, do we ever say it very slowly in our mind?
No.
Right? It's always fast. It's always, and not just with that, but most anxiety producing things we say to ourselves. So that's a very different way to approach things from, say, cognitive behavioral therapy, where we're questioning the cognitive distortion. The distortion in this sense.
Oh, I'm sorry, Duff. I just muted everybody, and let me unmute you there. I'm sorry, you're unmuted again.
Okay. Yeah, so the distortion could be in the words we're using. Maybe it's not true that we don't have enough time. We could argue with that. But we don't necessarily have to. It's sometimes even just faster to just change that voice tone, the speed, or other submodalities. And you get an instant difference in how you feel. So that's just one example. Here's another thing you can do in your exploration if you want. Let's say there's something that you want to move on from, that you want to put behind you. Well, what if you did that literally? So if you imagine something, just take something minor, not your life's biggest issue right now. But if you imagine something right now that's like a picture, and you can make that picture in front of you of something you might want to put behind you, and you reach out and you take that picture and you put it behind you. How far behind you do you want to put it? And if you imagine doing that, how does that change how you feel about it? If you notice that now. So that's kind of an interesting one you can do. And there's so many things like this. So many different distinctions. But I want to talk just briefly about like different ways we can use submodalities. So I've come up with 5 different ways. You might even come up with some more. But these are things people do already with submodalities. So one thing you can do with them is just explore freely until you find something that works better. So if you don't know to like slow down a specific, thing that you're saying to yourself, how would you even start? Well, you just sort of figure out what you're doing first, either in your pictures or your internal voice or both. And then you just kind of start messing around with things and see what happens. So if you have, say, a visual that comes to mind when you think about something, and the visual is panoramic, it's self-position, it's like you're back there, it's in full color, and you can hear everything that you hear and so on. So that's one way of experiencing the world, but it's certainly not the only way you can look at a memory or imagine something happening. So take something kind of neutral or whatever you want, or maybe slightly negative or slightly positive, and kind of imagine a step into that. So it could be just like brushing your teeth in the morning, or it could be driving somewhere, or it could be hanging out with somebody you like, whatever it is. And as you recall that, first just step into it fully, like it's happening again, or you're doing it now, and it's in full color, and it's all around you, panoramic, and you're there. And then when you've got that, start exploring things just to see, could this be enhanced? Could that, what happens if I start changing things? So what happens if you step out of it and you see it over there as a picture? Does that make it interesting, better or worse? Give you some insight? And what happens if you move the picture around, move it over to the left? What does that do? We'll move it over to the right. And you might not notice very, very many differences, or something might go, oh, wow, that's very different. Or move it down below you or up above. And move it wherever you'd like. And then imagine changing, like you have a dial that goes from full color to black and white. You kind of rotate that dial down. Just put it all the way to black and white first. And notice what that does. And then move it up so there's a little bit of color, and kind of play with that dial and notice, what does that do? Black and white to color. And put that dial wherever you want it. You're just exploring. And now try expanding the picture, making it bigger and bigger and bigger. And try shrinking the picture and making it smaller and smaller and smaller. Just imagine. If you can't see it clearly, it's okay. Just pretend. And try rotating the picture. Do whatever you want. Imagine you have Photoshop or an image editing program, and you actually know how to use it. And and you can adjust the picture however you want. You can turn up the colors. You have a dial for that. Make it brighter and brighter, more vivid, more colorful. Add some colors in that aren't even in there. Or you can experiment with leaving just like one object or one person in the picture in color and turn everything else to black and white. What does that do? Or you can experiment with making it a movie instead of a still picture, or maybe several movies next to each other. There's infinite things you can do. And as you explore those things, you can learn something new about your experience. So the first way of exploring submodalities is you can just kind of take a situation or a problem and just explore in all the different ways. You probably have a list of what the submodalities are. There's many more that aren't on whatever list you have. I came up with like 43 in the visual alone. So there's endless things to explore. But one way you can do this, and you can do this with clients, is just explore openly and see. And just ask them after each exploration, how was that? How did that go? Was that better or worse?
And that, Duff, I gotta say, is one of the coolest things that we do in our business.
Yeah.
When we ask how was that, and they tell us, whatever they answer, you will have not heard from anybody else ever before.
Totally. It's super fun. I highly recommend, if you've never played around with like this with clients, you just do it and kind of open-ended. You don't know what's going to happen. They might discover some way of doing things inside that no one else has ever done before, but it's unique to them and really works for them.
Right.
And that can be a great way to change too, because it really fits for them. It's not imposing something on them that is not going to fit for them. And it's also just great fun, and it can get you in this mode of just like, hey, let's see what happens. I don't know if it's going to work.
Plus, they learn such a useful skill.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, for sure. So just exploring things can be a great way to do submodalities. And maybe, does anyone have any feedback about what they just explored that was kind of interesting? Or
so
that they
I
learned?
muted everybody again because we do have some audio issues. If you have
Yes.
if you have something you'd like to share, please just raise your hand. And if you go down to the bottom bar, it'll say participants. You can go there and raise your hand, and I'll keep an eye on that, and I'll bring you in if there's something you want to say. So I'll bring him in, Duff. You keep doing your thing. It's so cool to listen to what you're saying.
Yeah, if anybody has anything that they noticed that was interesting.
Okay, yes, 2 people raised their hands.
Love to hear it.
Okay, Carrie Wynn, I'm coming to you to unmute you. Unmute. Carrie Wynn.
Hello, everybody. Nice background, Duff, by the way.
Hey.
So it was really interesting. I used a really recent positive experience where I was hanging out in my beanbag room with a friend and just having really good conversation. And it was a particular friend that I have had some struggle with, just dynamics. And there were 2 moments where I had this like clarity, and it felt like basically I felt like she and I had been on a different level. Like it was very much, the relationship was about her. And there was something that happened. I think it might have been where the black and white and one person is in color. And then we shifted. It was that combined with the different TVs, which I'd never done with that with submodality play. And all of a sudden it was like, oh, I can switch. Like I'm actually level with her because I am the listener, not I'm always the listener, so I'm lower. So thank you for that. I just wanted to share that experience. And I think that if I had been on the client side, like on a one-on-one, creating that space for me to, like, for a client to share that, then opens up so much possibility of like, okay, what is it we need to work on here with this balance? So that's just a surprising personal experience I just had. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Awesome. Yeah, great. Thanks for
Cool.
sharing.
Thank you. And let's see. Joni has her hand up. Joni Nighty.
Still muted.
There. No, it's not.
Still muted.
Joni, try to unmute yourself if you would, because it's not letting me unmute you for some reason.
How's that?
There you are.
So first of all, thank you so much. I love this work. This is what I live for. This might, I combine cognitive behavioral therapy because I haven't been a therapist for so long, but these techniques are amazing. And being here and being able to experience it and being on the other end has been fantastic. That particular exercise, I just want to share with you, I was focusing on a really positive experience that is somewhat in the past. It was a few years ago, but it was at a championship meet, and we were really focused on, I was focused on my daughter's performance. And as you were going through it, I saw first black and white because it was in the past, and then brought it back to the present when you said to add the bright colors. I could see the swimming pool, and I could see all the colors of the different fans, all the different organizations, and then expanded to then it was a video, then a picture frame, and it looked like the Brady Bunch. You know how they have the it's like a collage.
Yeah.
And I saw all these different scenes, and instead of just having that moment that, where she performed so well, all these little side experiences came into the memory that I had forgotten about, being with the parents before, that, all that cohesive group. And then the congratulations, and just watching not just my daughter, but just different peers and others consoling. It was really, really amazing how many. I mean, that collage was getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So
yeah, that's a great example for a number of reasons. The first being that there's a submodality of number, and this usually only shows up in the visual very prominently. But how many pictures are there? How many mental movies are there at once? Which you can do simultaneously in the visual. It's harder to do simultaneous in auditory because the sounds conflict with each other. So you can have the number of things, and adding number can really enhance an experience. And then you also, of course, went from black and white to color, which enhanced the experience and the size. And that's also another thing to talk about. We don't always have to just solve problems. We can also enhance positive resource states or positive memories as in what we do.
Well, how many people anchor a safe place by saying add color to it, add sounds, make it prettier, make it better? You know, that's taught in hypnosis schools all the time. I don't think it's taught as NLP or submodality shifts, but it's just the natural thing to do, right?
Right. Yeah, right.
Angela, I'm sorry, Angela, you had your hand up and you lowered it.
It was amazing to me how fast I go from scene to scene. As soon as you say it, it's there. Is that normal? Is that typical?
Very weird. Just kidding.
I can't give time. I'm like waiting for, and it's just so dang fast. Is it?
Yeah, everybody's different, Yeah, some people comes up right away. Other people takes time, but.
And I think that's all the hands up right now, Duff. So
okay, great.
So you can move all of these things around visually and auditorily and things like that. Do you play with emotions in the same way?
Yeah, well, going back to our model, yes. And there's several things you can do there. So one of the things is you can just change the submodalities, which automatically changes the emotion, as we just saw with some of the examples here. And you can explore freely like we just did. That's a fun way to do it. If you want a more routine thing, though, you can do a couple different things. One is you can do what's called mapping across submodalities. And this sounds very technical. What does that mean, mapping across? It's actually super easy. It's here's how I put it. Don't think of it this way. Think of it this way. That's all mapping across submodalities is. Don't think of it this way. Think of it this way. And how do we know what to map across? How do we know how to think of it? And there's two basic ways we can do that. One is we have sort of a pre-given set of submodalities that works for most people most of the time, and just think of it that way. So there's a lot of techniques that already exist like this. One of the ones that most hypnotists and NLPers have probably already done has a million names, but it was originally called the NLP Fast Phobia Cure. We don't say the word cure anymore. It's on the naughty list. But we do. So one with the movie theater, right? And you see a small black and white picture of yourself over there, and you're seeing the movie theater, and then you float out to the projection booth, so you see yourself seeing yourself watching a small black and white movie, et cetera, et cetera. If you don't know the steps to that, there's a great YouTube video from Steve Andreas called Therapy Isn't Brain Science, where he goes into the fine details of that technique in about 20 minutes at a conference. Highly recommend that one. But yeah, so the basic idea uses several submodality shifts. That you have a small, so size, picture of yourself on the screen, so your observer position. It's black and white, so you take the color out. And then you step back into the projection booth. So now you have height, and you also have more distance, and you also have another observer position. All of these distinctions make things feel more and more and more neutral. That's why it was used with phobias or even severe trauma. And now a version of this has been rigorously tested for veterans with PTSD and is being taught in workshops with Frank Burke is leading up that with a few other people. Rick Gray and some other folks have been working on the studies and getting that published and getting that training out there to the wider world of non-NLP practitioners, which is great because in one of the studies, it was like 96% of the veterans who had PTSD flashbacks did not have it after that and no longer qualified for the PTSD diagnosis. And it was like 4 or 5 sessions. They just did the same technique over and over with as many memories as they could and really drilled it in. Which is different than how I was operating until I heard about that. I was like, oh, okay, maybe I need more repetition with these things. But so that's one technique. But the basic principle behind that technique is we're taking a memory, and with a traumatic memory, usually someone is in self position. It's like they're living it over again, right? They're seeing out of their own eyes. It's in full color. It's happening all over again. That's why they freak out and they feel terrible. And they have the fight, flight, freeze response kick off. So you change all of those factors by saying we're going to have that same movie, but it's going to be way over there. It's going to be small, and you're going to see yourself seeing it. It's going to be black and white and all that. And then at the end, you even step into the movie at the end and rewind the whole thing in reverse, which is a weird thing to do. And all of that changes how you're thinking about it in a way where it's really hard to get any negative feelings back about that thing. So that's one example, but there's many examples where you already have sort of a pre-given list of submodalities, and you think of it this way. There's another technique called aligning perceptual positions. I don't know how many people have learned that one here, but it's taught in the core transformation training, and it uses mapping across submodalities in 3 different positions: observer position, self position, and then other position, in regards to like a relationship that you might have, and goes through many fine distinctions. But instead of just exploring openly, there's sort of a list of things that you map across to. So that's what you do, just one at a time in that case. But mapping across, you can also map across to a resource state that the person already has. And there's many methods built on this idea. One of the original belief change processes in NLP was think of something you no longer believe to be true that you used to believe, and then think of a belief you have now that you want to change. And how do you do that? So how do you believe that this is no longer true? What do you picture? How do you picture it? Where's the image? Is it color black and white? Is observer, et cetera, et cetera? And then how do you believe this current thing? And then you map across. In that case, you usually have to build in another thing too, because you'll just stop believing that thing. And then you're like, okay, well, now what do I believe? And that can be kind of disorienting.
I don't have any beliefs anymore.
I don't have any beliefs. I don't believe anything. So there's different versions now that I think, I don't typically use that one, but you can. But there's other things you can do, like map across from ingratitude or irritation, frustration to gratitude. That can be kind of fascinating. How do you think of this? How do you think of that? And then look at it the other way. And when you do that, you just pick one thing at a time. So let's say one of them is you see yourself over there, observer position, and the other one, you're in self position, the resource state. So you just pick that one thing and you say, okay, notice what happens if you step into it as like you're looking out of your own eyes in self position. And you wait and you see what their experience is. Oftentimes there'll be one of the differences between the 2 categories that is driving the whole thing. It might be perceptual position or location. Those are big drivers in general. So you often don't have to even map over all of them explicitly, because 1 or 2 of them will just do it. So anyway, that's something you can do that is very useful.
Duff, some people have even said here, how can it happen so quickly?
How can it happen so quickly?
But the truth is, our brains work at the speed of thought all the time. We're making these differentiations like this all the time, whether we're told to or not. We're just doing it. That's how fast the mind works.
Right. And with much of this stuff, I think what's happening is you're creating a new neural connection, and that can happen very, very quickly, just like you can learn very quickly. In NLP, they talk about one trial learning, like, you touch the hot stove once, you don't have to touch it again. We can learn very quickly sometimes. And, it doesn't take that long to just rehearse it a few more times just to be sure.
Think about it this way, if for a moment, if you see your grandmother naked, you can't unsee that, right? You only have to see it once. And you're never going to unsee that. That works.
Right. So especially when something's emotionally impactful, as many of these techniques are, I think the emotion really helps to create those new neural connections, and it can be very quick. So there's another thing you can do with submodalities, which is, we might call it synesthesia. So there's a number of techniques based on this. So basically, you start out by asking someone to think about some situation they want to change, and they get into that situation, and then you say, and what do you feel when you're back in that memory or in that imagined public speaking scenario or whatever it is? And they say, I feel anxious. You say, okay, great. And where do you feel that in your body? And they say, oh, okay, well, yeah, that's butterflies in my stomach. Okay, great. So you feel butterflies in your stomach, and how big is that feeling? How, in the stomach that the butterflies feeling? Is it like really small, or does it like take up a lot of room? And they'll tell you how big it is. And what shape is that feeling? Is it like circular? Is it like angular? Like what shape is it? And then at this point you can say, and what color is it? And we've all done processes like this, right? Mm-hmm. It sounds like the first 3 questions were about the kinesthetic, and they were, but they're also ambiguous, because something can be a size, a location, size, shape can be kinesthetic, but it can also be visual. So at this point you can start working with the visual, and you can do various things with that, because it's more challenging for most people to just change purely the feeling once they get it. But it's easier for people to change a visual. So at that point, you can do various things. You can change the color, say, oh, it's red. So what would happen if it changed to blue? Oh, that feels different. There's like various spinning feeling techniques. Has anyone learned any spinning feeling techniques? A few people, yeah. And spinning, is sort of kinesthetic, but it's definitely visual. You can see things spin, and you can give it a color, and you can spin it backwards and change the color, or there's various things you can do with that. You can move it. You can, change the location. I have a technique called the rapid centering technique, which we could do right now if we want, which changes location and size. That's it. And it works really well with just about everything. So actually I could demonstrate that if you want.
Ooh.
Does someone want to do it?
Who wants to do it? Let me see.
Who wants to become centered?
First hand that I see goes up. Otherwise I'm doing it.
I saw Angela raise her hand in the video.
Oh, okay. I didn't see the video. Angela gets to do it then, because that's what we said. First hand that goes up. So Angela, you are unmuted.
Yay!
Yay! So Angela, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
So do you have a situation in which you'd like to feel more centered? What I mean by that is emotionally stable and secure no matter what's going on there. So that could be like you feel some anxiety, some anger, some anything that you would like to feel more calm, collected inside.
When I do a hypnosis session.
Perfect.
I'm not sure what I'm going to do.
Okay. So, and when you do a hypnosis session and you're not centered, what do you feel? What emotion would you say you feel?
Anxious.
Anxious. Okay. So you got that. And if you think about a situation in which you felt anxious, or imagine a situation in the future in which you feel anxious during a hypnosis session, where do you feel the anxiety in your body?
All through the center.
All through the center. Okay. And when it's all through the center, where does is it like go all at the top of your head to the bottom of your feet? Or is it?
It does. It's kind of a separate feeling in the head. It's kind of in the back of the head.
So there's a feeling in the back of the head. And then there's all through the center, like up into, where does it go to or extend to?
Probably right around the breastbone down to just above the belly button.
Okay. So, and it's like, you said like a tube almost, or no?
Like a tube, yeah.
Like a tube about yay wide. Uh-huh. Okay. And there's a separate feeling in the head, and where's that?
Like a skull cap.
Skull cap. Okay. Okay. And which of those do you think is the most important or primary of the two? If you think about it now. We could do both, but just one at a time.
Probably the skull cap, because it's the one that's more worried about saying the right words.
Makes sense. So you got the skull cap situation. And how big is that? Is that like a...
I don't know. Like, is it the Jewish ones that have the skull?
Yeah, the yarmulke.
Yeah, yarmulke.
So you've got a yarmulke back there of anxiety, which is a strange thing. And and is it round like that?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's round.
Like a metal, like a cold metal.
Oh, it's metal. Yeah. That's an unusual yarmulke. And what color is it?
Metal, gun red.
Metal.
Yeah.
Like silvery or something?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So now we're going to do a very simple, easy visualization exercise that will help you to get centered. Would you like to do that?
I would love it.
Okay, great. So whenever you're ready, you can just close your eyes. And imagine in front of you is a full-length mirror. And you can see yourself in that mirror. You can see your hair. You can see the glasses on your face. You can see your shirt and the color of your shirt. And here's the interesting thing. If you go down below your belly button in the mirror, there's a spot that's the very center of your body in your low belly. It's about 2 inches below your belly button. And it's the very center of your body. If you're standing up, it would be halfway in between your feet and your head, and halfway in between the left and right side of your body, and right in the middle of front to back of your body too. And in the mirror, you can see that point as like a tiny little dot, like the size of a grain of sand, or like if you took a pen and you just made the smallest dot you could, that's where it would be. That's how size it would be. Okay. And then you can also see in that mirror, or visualize, imagine, or pretend in that mirror that there's a round metal silvery skull cap you can see on your head over there, representing the anxiety about saying the right words. You got all that? Mm-hmm. Okay. Here's what we'll do. On the count of 3, when I say 3, imagine there's a powerful, attractive force like a magnet or a black hole in that center point. It just sucks up all that round metal silvery color. So it shrinks down smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until it's absorbed within that point and it shrinks and fits inside of it. On the count of 3, 1, 2, and 3. See that happening now in the mirror. And once all of that is in that tiny point in your center, because it's in your belly, you can digest fully all that energy, eliminating any of that you no longer need, sending it back, and fully, there you go, yeah. And everything you're going to keep, just like you digest your food and you break it down into glucose and lipids and various things, you can break it down into pure energy and circulate it throughout your body, trusting your unconscious mind to send it where it's needed, when it's needed. Allowing that to integrate before you check in and notice, how do you feel now?
My head's warm.
Good. So there's some changing sensations, some warmth in the head. And is there still like that tube in the torso, or is that gone?
It's almost completely gone, yeah.
Almost completely gone.
Kind of absorbed at the same time.
Okay. Cool. And is there anything left there that you'd like to also integrate, or is it okay for now?
Do it the same way?
Yeah. So what's remaining? How big is it? Where is it located?
Like half of the bottom, almost see-through.
Half of the bottom, almost see-through. Does it have a color to it besides see-through?
I guess opaque.
Opaque.
Yeah, like an opaque white color.
Opaque white. Okay. Great. And so again, imagine you have a full-length mirror in front of you and you can see yourself in that mirror. You can see your hair, you can see your face, the glasses on your face. You can see your shirt and the color of your shirt. And as you look down towards your belly button, below your belly button, you can see a tiny point at the center of your body, center of your being. And you can also see an opaque white tube that's see-through over there in the mirror, representing the remaining anxiety. And on the count of 3, when I say 3, you can see and imagine a powerful attractive force in that center point, shrinking down all of that opaque white color till it gets smaller and smaller and smaller and is absorbed completely within it. On the count of 3, 1, 2, and 3. See that happening now. And what happens in a mirror happens in you as you experience those changes now. That's it. And then once all that energy is in your center point, you can come fully digest it all, eliminating any you don't need and recycling all the rest as it circulates throughout your body as pure energy, freed up for other purposes. And notice how you feel now.
That's pretty cool.
Pretty cool.
And actually, you do feel the energy cycling for the body.
Yeah.
The rest of the body.
Totally.
I like that.
Good.
I'm going to use that.
Good. Excellent. You should use that.
Yeah, thank you.
And as you think about doing some hypnosis now with clients, what's that like? Does it seem different? Or is
I
it
don't know. As you said that, it just got a settling feeling like, this is good.
This is good.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, you can take that with you. You can take the technique and you can take those feelings with you as you work with your clients.
Thank you. I've enjoyed your presentation tonight. Thank you very much.
Wasn't that beautiful? Thank you very much. That was really lovely.
Yeah. Anybody have any questions about that or any questions for Angela that she'd be willing to answer?
Just raise your hand and I will grab you. Well, I won't grab you, but virtually I'll grab you and unmute you. How's that? Or reach over and unmute yourself. That might work too. I don't see anybody raising any hands. I'm curious, Duff. Some people have told me, some of my students, as we're learning this and going through this, they begin by saying, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to ask. I'm afraid if they're talking to me. Some people transitioning from being script readers to actually interacting with their clients find it terrifying. How do you know what to say?
Well, the first thing to realize is I don't know what to say most of the time. And that's okay. You don't have to
let them say it.
You don't have to know everything. Yeah. But asking questions can help because then they'll say things and then you can, work with what they bring up. One of the reasons I actually like submodalities so much is that there's so many things you can do that you don't have to know where it's going to go. You don't have to know what words to say. And you can even stumble over your words a little bit, and it's totally fine. Steve Andreas, who I worked for until he passed last year, still work for Connie Ray. He would do sessions with people with submodalities all the time. That was like his main tool set. And sometimes he would run into things where he didn't know what to say, didn't know what to do. And he would just actually say, I'm not sure what to do at this moment. And he would just pause. And so some new idea came. And I always thought that was really great.
And sometimes that new idea comes from the client, does it not?
Exactly.
Because when you say, I don't know what to do, they'll go, well, what about? And that's a way to prompt them into doing their own work anyway.
Right. And with submodality work, with just exploring these different ways of thinking, you can ask them how it changes in their experience. And so they are exploring and they are experiencing things for themselves. You don't have to have all the answers, just a great relief. You don't have to know ahead of the session even what you're going to do, as long as you have an exploratory attitude and you're willing to just try things. And people will come up with things that you couldn't possibly have predicted. So even when I do this rapid centering technique, which I just did, which is fairly scripted, it has step-by-step, it's mapping across to something that's already existing. Sometimes I'll find that people don't want to move things into the lower belly and shrink them. Oh no, what do I do? I'm off script. Well, then I just fall back to exploring submodalities in a more open way. And I say, oh, okay, well, where does it want to go to? And they'll tell me. They'll say, oh, it wants to go out here. Okay, well, make it go out there and see what happens. Oh, it feels much better. Now it's changing into rainbows. Okay, great, rainbows. Wonderful. It can do whatever it wants. I don't care. It's your imagination.
Right. To quote the great philosopher Melissa Tears, this shit's all made up. So, right? So what they are coming up, who else but Angela has a skull cap and a tube?
Who knew?
Nobody. And how could you have known that, Duff, if you hadn't asked her? You couldn't have come up from that. You couldn't have pulled that out of thin air to save your life. Right?
I didn't have to have a script about skull caps and tubes. I just worked with what was there, and that's the cool thing. So you can change location, size, color, shape. You can change perceptual position. If you just had those 5 things, you could invent 20 new techniques this week with your clients because there's so many possibilities. There could be a whole shape technique where you find out what the shape is and you turn it into a triangle and a square and you just explore different shapes and you see what that does to people's experience. That alone, it just could be location. Like at first I thought actually location was all you needed. Just move it to the low belly and you'd feel fine. And I worked with a couple people that got belly aches when I did that. I was like, that's not what I'm going for. So I don't want to, this isn't the belly ache technique. So I experimented and I found that size changed things. Of course, right? A big problem versus a tiny little problem, and it feels different. So, it's just implied in these things. But, I never changed the color. You could change the color. You could do all sorts of things and just experiment and have fun with it.
And it is fun when you let the client play along. I mean, if you're looking at it, taking that frame of, we're playing here. We're throwing strands of spaghetti against the wall until one of them sticks. And then we know that the spaghetti is cooked and we're done.
Totally. Looks like Angela's trying to raise her hand, or she's petting a cat in a very...
I am petting a cat and trying to raise my hand.
Okay.
But, what's interesting to me is I'm so comfortable doing that for getting rid of pain once we've established that it's okay to let go of useless stuff. And I'm so comfortable doing that, but it never occurred to me to use it across these other ways.
Yeah, and that's funny because when I first did the rapid centering technique, someone said, "Oh, you could use this for pain. This sounds like something I use for pain." And I was like, "Really? I didn't think that was possible either." Usually it's we're either on the pain side of the street or the emotional side of the street. We don't realize
everything.
They can kind of go together. Yeah. And again, you can either translate the feeling into something, say, visual and adjust visual submodalities, or you can say, what do you have to picture in your mind or say to yourself in order to feel that way? And then get that thought and then change things with that. Steve Andreas mostly did that. He mostly was like, what do you have to picture or say to yourself in order to feel that way? And we get the submodalities of the thought that creates the feeling. Whereas, spinning feelings and the rapid centering technique and whatever else you want to do with the feeling itself is more get the feeling first and then change the submodalities by translating it into visual. So there's different ways to work.
And if you'll talk to the client, you're going to figure that out. It's just going to unfold.
Sure.
Yeah, I don't want to scare anybody, but we've only got about, a little less than 15 minutes left. So if you want to ask some questions, raise your hand or get in here so that you can get.
I have a question.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, Duff, working with negative imprints, how do you work using submodalities to help somebody get rid of an imprint such as I'm not good enough, or I can't catch a baseball, or whatever it is that's going on that they were told by a father, an authority figure? You get the idea.
Yeah, so there could be a lot of different ways to do that. There's some specific methods already in NLP, something called the decision destroyer. I don't know if you've heard of that before. Destroyer is kind of a strong term. I would call it dissolver maybe. But so the idea is like there's a decision you made way back when that you're not good enough based on an initial imprint experience that usually happened when you were a kid. And the decision dissolver, as we'll call it, involves the idea that you can reframe that whole experience by creating a memory that happened before that experience. Now, this may trouble some hypnotists because it seems to create a false memory, but you can still believe it's false and yet have it work. One version of that I've done that's very easy to do is you imagine going back in a time machine and talking to your old self before the experience happened, and create some experience of like, well, okay, so this is going to happen to you soon, and it's not going to mean that you're not good enough. It's going to mean, your dad was really busy that day and he did this thing, and you interpret it in this weird way, but don't interpret it that way. It has nothing to do with you. So that's more of a hypnotic version of that. The decision destroyer usually actually uses submodalities, though, in that you think about something that actually happened and you're like, how do I know that actually happened and it was convincing? And then you create a false memory, but you kind of know that it's false. And you code it in that same way, and you put that before the event happened. So it ends up reframing the whole thing. So that's one way you can work with it. But you already mentioned a couple other ways that kind of jumped out to me as you were talking. You said, a father or a parent said this and that or whatever. So I would be curious about how is that represented auditorily? So if a client's saying to me, I have this experience from the past that ruined me, my dad said to me, you're not good enough. I was like, oh, interesting. How do you hear that now? If you hear I'm not good enough, where in space is that? Where is that voice coming from? How loud is it? What voice tone does it use? How fast is that voice? These sorts of things. Steve Andreas actually has a whole book, or two books on internal auditory submodalities for self-talk. One called Transforming Negative Self-Talk, and then More Transforming Negative Self-Talk. And the first book just has a smattering of techniques, and the second one has a long, specific technique that would probably be very appropriate in this case, because it involves, if you have, say, an internal voice that says, I'm not good enough, one of the first things you ask is, whose voice is that? Is that actually your voice, or is that somebody else's voice? And usually it's a parent's voice or somebody else's voice. And then you have them in space, put them in front of you kind of and talk to that person. But then there's submodality adjustments within that. So that's kind of an interesting thing. So there's lots of things you can do. And a part of it also is eliciting how the client is doing that. So just having the term imprint experience doesn't really tell me how that's being represented yet for that particular person. You can just do a generic technique like decision destroyer or whatever, but you can also get very specific and so when you think about that experience, how do you do that? Do you say something to yourself, or you picture something in your mind? Or do you hear your dad's voice, or what is it for you? And sometimes it'll be a picture, and then you can start adjusting that. You say, oh, yeah, well, where is that? Is it in color, black and white? Is it in front of you, or did you put it behind you in the past? All these sorts of things, and start playing with it and see how it goes.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm. And one more thing you could do too is there anything else in your past that you've moved on from? Right? That you feel like you've moved on from that is no longer affecting you in the present. How do you represent that? Oh, okay, that one's off to your left, and you can see yourself in the image, and it's small, and it's black and white. And the one that still affects you is right in front of your face, and full color or whatever, and really big, and you can shrink it down, move it over, make it black and white, and it will no longer bother you. That sort of thing.
And sometimes you go through all of those steps until you find the spaghetti strand that sticks. Sometimes,
yes.
Right, you say move it over here or slow it down. No, that doesn't change it. I had a client once, I said, and what happens if you slow that voice down? Oh my God, that would just prolong the pain.
Yeah.
Right? So, okay, there's nothing wrong with that. That's great feedback. Great, we won't slow it down. Thanks for that input.
No, you just force them into the box that you came with, so that get in there, round peg.
That's right. You can try all sorts of things, kind of, and see if you agree with this, Duff. The one thing we know when the client comes in is the way they're doing it isn't working. That's the only thing we really know, is the way they're doing it right now isn't working. Right. So if they try anything different, they'll at least get a different result.
Right. Yeah. And the sort of classic NLP question is, how do you do that? Framing everything as a skill. How do you get yourself to keep thinking about this over and over and feeling bad about it? That's neat. Tell me how to do that. So I can take over for you for a day. You can be free from the problem. I'll be you, right? You can take a little vacation, but the problem is I don't know how to do it. So you got to teach me. How do I do this? And then, get them to elicit those submodalities, that strategy, so you can, and then you can start messing with it. So, okay, so it has to be like this. It has to be framed right here. So if I do it this way, that's not going to work. Okay, great. Good to know.
I'm flipping. It looks like somebody's raising their hand. Oh, Caroline. Not. I'm going to try to unmute you.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yes.
No, I got excited. I said, that's brilliant. I was talking. I burst out in excitement.
Yeah. Well, I didn't make any of that up. I mean, I've learned this from other people. I think that "let me take over for you for a day" comes from Richard Bandler. He made that one up. He's a wacky guy. But yeah, that's a fun one. I use that one a lot.
Well, it encourages a little laughter, which lightens the whole situation, and it just works on so many levels.
Right. Yeah, I think a lot of people take their problems way too seriously, and it's much more fun to see it as a skill. Gets a little dissociation, like, oh yeah, I'm doing that, right? Role reversal, all that kind of stuff, which is a lot of fun to play with.
That's great. You are wonderful. I'm just so glad that I had the opportunity to be part of this tonight. I learned a lot.
Oh, good. Yeah, great fun. If you have other questions afterwards, feel free to get in touch, email me. I love talking about this stuff, so it's always fun to chat.
And I was about to ask, how do we email you or get in touch with you?
Sure, yeah. My website's boulderhypnosisworks.com, BOULDER as in Boulder, Colorado, boulderhypnosisworks.com. I got a free Resilience 101 training that somebody said they signed up for. Bob, maybe?
It was me, yeah. That's great.
Yeah, some people like. And nobody who dislikes it has told me that yet, so that's good.
Okay, so how do we sign up for that, Duff? How do we sign up? How do we get that free?
Oh, it's super easy. If you go there, you'll see a button on the homepage. And then I got a new article up. It's a new website, so there's not a lot on there yet, but I got a new long article there too, and I'll be sending out newsletters and stuff. But you can always get in touch through my contact form or whatever there too.
And do you see clients on Zoom?
I do. I am a Zoomer.
Someone told me just a couple of weeks ago that it's impossible to do NLP via Zoom.
Impossible. Yes.
Completely.
I agree. I'm a total fraud.
And it's evidenced here because there were a couple of people who had some wonderful results in this impossible work online.
Don't believe it.
All right, we've got maybe 2 more minutes. Does anybody else have a quick question before we call it a night? While I'm waiting for those hands to go up, if I see any, I'll take you real quick. But I do want to point out a couple of things. People have asked me a number of times if you have to do a long induction in order to get somebody into that hypnotic trance. I think Duff showed us tonight that really all you have to do is ask a question, and as soon as they go off to give you their weird answer about the skull cap and that tube going, they're in a trance. That's not conscious. Mm-hmm. That's not conscious. They're not in the here and now telling you about a skull cap, right? So they're already in a trance just by looking for the answer to that question. And the other thing is, you don't have to be monotone and slow and things like that in order to help somebody in hypnosis, because Duff has a wonderfully resonant voice that he uses to tell pictures, and all of that just brings it all to vivid imagination. We are imagination engineers, and whatever technique you can use to enhance that imagination, isn't it wonderful? Thanks for really displaying that for us tonight, Duff.
Oh, yeah, thanks for having me. It's always a good time talking about NLP and hypnosis. And I will say, though, if someone hires you to be a hypnotist, then, you can always guide them into a trance because that's what they expect.
Yes.
So there's no harm in that. It's nice to relax and go through a nice trancey experience. But you obviously don't have to do that, which is also nice to be flexible and be able to, approach it in various ways.
You also don't have to be quick. You also don't have to do wide awake hypnosis. You can also give somebody a wonderfully relaxing, progressive muscle relaxation experience if that's what benefits your client.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, I think the key is just be flexible and try what works both for you and your client.
Yeah. Where are you going to be? Where can we see you this year?
Oh, I'm going to be everywhere. I'm going to be at the ICVCH in February in Las Vegas. Of course, in HypnoThoughts in August. Karen invited me to the Midwest one. I don't know if I'm going to make it to that one this year because I got so much else going.
See?
All right. Well, Maria says I have to go, so maybe I have to go now.
Yes.
And I'm also going to be in Stockholm, Sweden. If you want to come to Sweden in March 7th and 8th, it's going to be cold, but that's a perfect place for a resilience training in the middle of March in Sweden.
Right. And do you do training in Boulder?
I haven't done any yet, but I think either this year or next year is going to be my first trainings in Boulder for sure.
I encourage you to do it. Thank you, Duff, so much for being with us. It's absolutely great. I enjoyed the entire time. And we can get you in Boulder. We can see you at ICVCH. And right now we want to thank you. We do this at the end every night where you get the whole cacophony of thank yous. I'll remind everybody really quick before I unmute the mics that IACT is in Orlando this year, and in IACT and IMDHA Orlando this year. Make your room reservations because they're filling up fast, and that will be in April. And ICVCH is in February. You can get the replays on Facebook and the IACT IMDHA websites tomorrow. File for your CEUs. Duff, thank you very much. Unmuting all. And we can all say thank you and a big rousing farewell. Thank you, Duff, very much.
Thank you.
Love you lots. Thanks, Duff, very much. Michael, we missed you, and we'll see you next time. Second Tuesday next month. We'll be right back here, same place. See you then.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.